The rear wing on an EVO is an iconic design element of every generation of Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution. However, since I'm based in the United States, this video is going to be about the EVO 8 and EVO 9 rear wing. And most people don't know, but there are subtle differences between the 8 and 9 wing, despite the fact that they look very similar. So what we're going to do in this video is talk about how you could remove and install your rear wing. We're going to remove one of these end plates and take a look inside this EVO 8 wing and look at these mounting brackets if you ever had to do anything with those. And finally, we'll talk about one of the most common issues with this wing, and that's the clear coat peeling off and fading and how you could potentially fix that. So let's start with the difference between the 8 and 9 rear wing. Now, the only way to actually tell the difference between the 8 and 9 rear wing is by taking a look at the inner plate of these side pieces. This inner piece on an EVO 8 wing will be carbon fiber, as opposed to an EVO 9 wing, which is just plastic. Another giveaway to easily spotting this is the 4 kind of shiny rivets or dots you see here. Those 4 pieces are actually what kind of hold the top piece of the wing to the side plates, at least on an EVO 8 wing. And that's how you can tell the difference between an 8 and a 9 wing, as the 8 wing will have these 4 dots and the 9 wing will not. And just for another example, here's an Apex Silver EVO 8 wing. Of course, you see the carbon fiber inside here. And now you can compare that to a photo of an EVO 9 rear wing where it's basically all silver on those side pieces. I only had access to an EVO 8 wing for this video, but I'm including some photos that were on an EVO M thread, which I will link to in the video description as well, if you want to learn more about removing the end plates or possibly disassembling an EVO 9 wing. So are these end plates the only difference between the 8 and 9 wing? Well, no. Another significant difference between the two wings is that the EVO 8 wing, in yellow in this photo here on the right, has some sort of expansion foam or something to keep this actual wing stiffer and stronger. And for whatever reason with the EVO 9 wing, they just didn't include this expansion foam. And while this may seem like it's not important, this has proven to be a weak point of the wing when it does not have that expansion foam in there. As you can see here, this is an EVO 9 wing where they added a little extra downforce and we're going at high speeds, and the wing actually just snapped, even putting a dent in the rear deck of the trunk lid. So if you are doing a lot of high speed events, you may want to reconsider actually using a stock EVO 9 wing. And again, I just want to mention, I'm going to link to a lot of these threads in the video description so you could check them out on EVO M and read more, especially if you have an EVO 9 rear wing. So let's move on how to remove this wing. It's actually pretty simple to remove. Of course, you're going to have to pop your trunk. And after you open your trunk, right away, you should actually be able to see that there are 2 nuts, one on each side, holding the one part of the wing on. And then to actually view the bolts that hold your wing on, you'll have to remove the rubber stoppers that kind of keep your trunk from rattling around. These rubber stoppers do have little arrows on them, and just for good measure, I like to kind of get a rough count of how many twists it took to get them out. That way I can try to put them in. The further you screw them in, the lower they would go. So it's just a matter of keeping your trunk from kind of vibrating around. It's something you can certainly check later after you reinstall the wing, but I like to just get a general idea to try to put it right back close to where it was. So I count the threads. I believe it was a full turn, maybe a turn and a half on my car. Now, I also want to mention, for demonstration purposes, I took this wing off and filmed myself doing it. I'm probably using different size bolts and nuts than you are because I actually had to create these brackets myself, and this is what I'm actually removing right now, is brackets that I'm going to show the creation of in just a little bit. So if your nuts and bolts don't look exactly the same as mine, that is why. Also, you may run into a similar issue to me. The nut inside the wing itself could potentially break loose, which is why I had to create the brackets myself as well, because rusty EVOs do rusty things. So just something to be aware of, it might take you a while to get your wing off if something actually broke loose inside with those brackets, which we'll touch on later. But ideally, removing your wing should go pretty simply. It's really just 2 nuts, 2 bolts, and then lifting up off the rear deck. And what I like to do is remove both the bolts first, remove one nut, and then have that one remaining nut kind of holding it in place. And then I will tilt the trunk lid down a little bit and then remove that final nut that's holding it in place. And then you just pull up on the rear wing. You'll have to pull up on each side. I'm kind of just showing it for example's sake here to pull up. It may be tough to get yours free the first time you take it off, if it just hasn't been removed in a long time, so you might have to pry with some force. And they also do typically have a gasket in there that goes between the wing and the rear trunk lid. So speaking of that gasket, if you wanted to buy a new OEM gasket, you could. I didn't bother for this car because this is just my rusty beater EVO. Okay, so now we're going to move on to taking a look inside the actual rear wing side end plates and looking into those brackets. I will say this is not an exact how-to. I'm not going to show you how to make these brackets, and unfortunately you can't just buy these brackets. So you might have to have someone help you make these brackets if yours are broken, or try to get really lucky finding them somewhere for sale used or something. But I really could not find this documented very well anywhere, so I just wanted to cover the process of how I removed my end plates and show a bit more about what those brackets look like. So to remove the end plates, there are actually 4 rivets on the bottom side of the wing that you can see here. Only the 2 most outside rivets would need to be drilled out at this time. So 2 of those rivets are helping hold that plastic end piece in place, and 2 of those other rivets are actually holding the mounting bracket in place. Now I was changing the mounting bracket along with removing these end plates, so I ended up drilling out all 4 of these. So all you need is a drill bit that's probably a little bit smaller than the center hole of those rivets, and you should be able to drill them out and they should just kind of pop free. And the next step is the fun part. It actually, this wing end plate is actually like glued on, and it has like some double-sided Velcro type stuff in there. It's a weird setup. It's not something you would expect to see from an OEM manufacturer, especially the way some of it's kind of cut out too, honestly. But regardless of all that, it does take some force to pull this end plate free. And it's going to make a loud snap. It's going to make a loud noise when it first breaks loose. But you should be able to pull with a lot of force, more towards the top of the wing, to break that top portion free. Just be careful of where it's touching the carbon fiber on the inside of the wing. Try to, get that free and watch for that. Make sure it's not kind of pulling on the carbon fiber itself too much. And then when it comes to freeing it up from the bottom, more where that plate is, I used a screwdriver, tried to scrape out some of the stuff that was in there holding it in place. There was some excess glue in there that I was kind of scraping out, and then I used some screwdrivers slowly but surely to try and pry it a little bit more free, because again, this is just basically glued in here, and you're trying to break free the glue without doing any damage to the carbon fiber. So while we're on the process of removing the end plates, again, I have not done this on an EVO 9, but there is someone who shared a how-to on EVO M, so I want to link to that and just share some pictures here about the differences and what it looks like removing those side plates on an EVO 9 wing. Now we'll move on to the brackets that are inside the wing. And while they certainly don't look pretty, I was able to recreate what I expect the original brackets had looked like in here. I honestly couldn't even really fully tell because mine were so rusty, as you can see here, broken into 2 pieces. But I was able to make something that worked, but luckily I had access to a plasma cutter and a welder, and I had to buy some nuts and bolts to make all this work. Perhaps someone soon will just start selling these. I did find a thread on Evolution M from years back where someone had made extras of these and sold them. I doubt they're still doing that, but maybe someone will start making these again if it becomes a high priority. Until then, though, plan on making your own if you're running into this issue. So what's interesting about these is they kind of need to be cut out in a certain way where that end plate can fit and fit on like you want it to, while you're still utilizing enough surface area of these, mounts, these brackets to hold the actual carbon fiber portion of the wing down. And just for another visual here, and this is actually when I was doing some testing to make sure that these brackets would work okay, you can see that it's got to go in between the carbon fiber here, or on top of the carbon fiber, I guess, if you were setting this on the car, but then also fit nicely into that outer portion of the wing and allow it to still kind of seat like you'd want it to and be right up against that carbon fiber piece. Now this is just a test fit. I bolted the wing down without the end plates on first, and then I actually took a marker and outlined where that actual bracket was so that I could then rivet it in place. So I want to do this because, of course, if you're off by a little bit too much when you're remaking something like a bracket like this, if your holes are off a little bit too much, it might not line up, quite right. Or if you had it too far inside or out, it might not work like you wanted to. You might not be able to get that end plate to fully cover. So those are things that I watched for, and a reason why I did this test mount first. And if you can't tell yet, I filmed this whole process over probably 3 months, honestly. So now we're actually in my house where it's nice and warm and not 0 degrees like outside. And this was the process of riveting these brackets in place. Now, I haven't done much riveting in my life, but it seemed to work just fine. You can buy a hand rivet gun for pretty cheap. I think it was like 15, 20 bucks, along with the rivets themselves. But what I ended up doing, possibly from a fault of my own and drilling too big on when I drilled them out initially, I made some new locations with the rivets. Also, like, they didn't fully line up with the new bracket I had made for some of them. They were kind of very close to the edge. So I don't think you need to feel like you would need to reuse the exact holes where the old rivets were. I feel like you could just get 2 good mounting locations, drill the right size hole for your rivet, and then put that pop rivet in, and then that should hold your bracket in place where you want it to be. And the reason you want to use these rivets here as opposed to a nut and bolt is basically you don't have a lot of space. You want this to be flat. When the rivets are done, you want a flat spot so that your wing can sit flush on your rear deck lid. So you can see it's not too pretty, but it does the job. These brackets are holding it in place. You can even see a little bit of my carbon fiber is not as nice as it should be. I'm going to show you the other side of the wing as well with that other bracket. And here you can see on the other side, it looked a little bit nicer on this side. It's just a byproduct of a wing that's almost 20 years old, I guess. Another thing that was actually kind of nice is you can see here that where the old glue was that held that old bracket in place, there must have been actually glue that maybe didn't hold the bracket in place as much as those end pieces. But you could see where that old bracket kind of was in place. So that helped me also know exactly where the new one should fit. So the next step, is weird as it seems, is to re-glue these end pieces on. If you wanted to, you could test fit the wing before you do this, just to make sure that the wing works before you glue these end pieces on. But I used some liquid nails for mine, and I looked wherever there was old glue. I honestly didn't spend a lot of time cleaning off the old glue. I know you're really supposed to get it all off, but I think this worked just fine. I mean, I went over it a little bit, got off any pieces that kind of seem easy to get off, but I left on a lot of the old glue, and then just put a thin layer of this liquid nails all the way around. And just for reference, the liquid nails I used is the clear 100% silicone adhesive. That's what worked for me. I've had this wing on my car, I guess, for a couple months now since I've done this, and it's held up just fine, but I'll certainly report back if I had any issues. And again, I would just follow where any of the old glue was. Of course, you don't want to put glue where there wasn't glue before. Mainly kind of the front part of this side plate and the rear part and the bottom. You don't really do as much on the top because that's where it's kind of got that double-sided Velcro stuff that holds it in place. Now, after I popped that wing on, we used a little force to try to push it and hold it in place. Then I had these plastic C-clamps, or whatever kind of clamps you want to do, something to just hold pressure on it. And the full cure time for this liquid nails was about 24 hours. So I did one side one day, left it sit for 24 hours, gave it a little, pull, tug, make sure I couldn't just pull it right off. And yeah, it seemed to hold just fine. But I recommend leaving it sit for however long your, liquid glue stuff that you use says to leave it set. So you repeat that process on both sides, and then hopefully your wing is reassembled, good to go. You could, of course, put those rivets back in as well. If there are the 2 rivet spots to hold those end plates, those plastic end plates in, you could put those rivets in as well. So real quick, to put your wing back on, if you took it off, it's, of course, just the reverse of removal. And I will give you the warning that if your wing is off and you pop your trunk, the trunk does just kind of fly up really quickly because it's used to having the weight, and it's sprung for the weight of the wing. So when the wing is off, your trunk just flies up really quickly. It doesn't really do any damage, but just wanted to note that. But of course, you're just going to set your wing back on the rear deck, put those 2 bolts in, put those 2 nuts on, and it should work just fine. I will say, in full transparency here, my brackets, of course, were not made perfectly. So I had to pay particular attention and be careful when I started my bolts in place, because they didn't quite want to line up perfectly. So I wanted to take extra time, take some precaution, and make sure I didn't strip my threads. So if you're doing the exact same thing as me, I recommend doing the same. Hopefully you're better at making these things more precise than me, and that really won't be an issue. But I recommend getting them all slightly started a little bit before you tighten any of them up. That'll help you give you some leeway if one of them wasn't going in quite perfectly. And once they're all tight, you'll put those rubber stop pieces back in. And hopefully you remember from the beginning that you kind of could count the threads and see how far those would need to be spun in. You can also actually kind of just look at them. If they've been sitting for 20 years, you can actually see about where the thread thickness, if you will, of the rubber gets thicker and thinner. And that can kind of give you an indication of how far it was spun in previously. But the good news is you can always try to just close your trunk. If it seems like it doesn't close, that means those rubber stoppers are out too far and you need to turn them in a bit more. So then you could turn them in into the rear deck a little bit, and that should give you more room to close the trunk. All right, the final chapter of this video, and what a lot of EVO owners probably actually want to know about. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly, how to do this part either, I feel like. Because I filmed this, believe it or not, I filmed this part in 2011. I was actually going to make this video over 10 years ago about how to fix the repair. But as I was doing it, I kind of realized, hey, you want to know how to fix it? Tape off anything you don't want repainted, sand off all the old clear, and then get it re-cleared. That's really it. The worst part about fixing the clear coat is kind of sanding off the old clear coat. But if you're a do-it-yourselfer and you want to save money and want to spend some time, I recommend talking to a body shop that does painting and maybe find out how much they would charge you to just do clear coat if you had everything kind of prepped and ready to go. So usually while they're painting something or clearing something, they could just add your wing. So the next time they cleared something, tell them you're not in a rush and just have a professional clear coat the wing for you. This job is also a lot easier if you only focus on the upper part of the wing, because that's nice and flat. If you have to do those inner side pieces and you're going to sand those down, that's definitely going to take a lot more time. Either way, if you want to leave this on the car, it might get a little messy on the car while you're sanding, but I found it can make it easier to sand this if you don't have anything else to hold the wing in place. I also recommend not hand sanding it like I am here, but it is nice to have something flat, to use something flat while you're sanding it down. If you have some electric sander, buffing wheel type of thing, that will obviously make this go a lot faster. So again, the process here, tape off. I didn't finish taping anything off as you see in this video. I know this is a bit of an incomplete how-to, but tape off anywhere that is painted that you wouldn't want sanded or have clear coat on. So that's kind of the first step, is taping things off. Next is sanding off the old clear coat. You have to be careful doing this. I know some people are probably gun shy of doing it because if you sand too far, you can kind of damage the carbon fiber. However, you can't really honestly damage that much. I have done this before where I went too far, particularly on the edges. You want to be careful on the edges because those sand a lot quicker, and all of a sudden you're just down past the carbon fiber. I don't think it actually does anything structurally to these as far as making it really weak or anything. So if you do get a little bit too far where it looks like all of a sudden you can't see that pattern of carbon fiber, then you've gone too far. But it's probably fine. Very few people will actually notice it, especially compared to the eyesore of what you saw, before I started sanding this, which is just that clear coat with multiple colors and just looking awful. And hopefully you can see with the zoomed in shot a little bit, you can see a bit more where the clear coat itself is, and you can see what you're trying to get rid of. You're trying to get rid of that layer of clear coat. Basically, that layer of clear coat is already getting rid of itself. It's coming off, it's flaking in certain spots, and you're just wanting to get rid of the whole thing, all that old clear coat, to make it nice and smooth so you can bring it to a body shop and have someone professionally clear it for you. Of course, if you want to, you could try just clearing it yourself. I imagine you could buy basically a spray can of clear, but I think usually it wouldn't cost too much if you brought it to a body shop just to have them put a fresh coat of clear coat on it for you if you did most all the prep work. And that's it. If you've done body work before, you certainly know that prep work is a lot of the job, not just painting. A lot of how good something turns out depends on how much time you spend prepping it, and the same would go here. So if you spend a lot of time taping things off really nice and you spend a lot of time sanding things off perfectly, that's where you're going to get pretty good results. So that's about it for this video, guys. I hope that was informative. Of course, mostly on the EVO 8 wing here, but hopefully it gave you a visual of anything that you were potentially looking at trying to do with your wing. And I know I was very curious what the inside of this wing actually looked like, because it was rather hard to find any information on people that actually pulled off those end plates and took a look inside. It's also where I'm appreciative of other people, like the thread I'm linking to with the EVO 9 wing. It's nice that other people have taken the time to dig inside of those wings as well. So I appreciate your comments. If you have any, please leave them in the comment section of wherever you're watching this video. I'll certainly try to reply. I also understand that I am not a professional at all this stuff, and I make mistakes along the way as well. So watch the comment section for any updates and any other people's opinions of what I may have done wrong in this video. But as always, this is Paul from Boosted Films saying thanks so much for watching.